We are here today with Shirley Stone, who is the curator of the photographic retrospective of the American Indian movement. Of course, the photographer is Dick Bancroft, and of course Shirley Stone, among other work that she does, of course, is the curator of this very important photo exhibit.
The exhibit that I'm going to show you now is a very exciting exhibit. And it's a very important exhibit. And I just want to tell you that it has had about 4,000 visitors to the exhibit. And there have been people from 22 different states in the country, so half of the United States, has seen the exhibit, and 9 foreign countries. So it's been a very popular exhibit. And the reason it was important to do, this is the hub. It is the largest urban Indian population in the United States. A lot of people don't realize that probably nearly 70% of American Indian people live in the city at some point now. And this is where it all started. It was the largest concentration, again, of urban Indian population. And the American Indian movement started right in this community. And it was the start for most of the major urban American Indian organizations. We have many generations of Indian people living in this neighborhood, and probably 70-some different tribes represented. But the reason it's important to show this exhibit of the movement was probably one of the most important civil rights movements of America's history. And it gave voice to American Indian people, and it really gave voice to the sovereignty that tribes have. But we have about probably 3 generations here now that did not live during the time of the movement. And we have to show them what happened. And some of the leaders of the movement live in this community. And it was very important to pass the story on, because their lives and maybe even the schools they go today were greatly affected by leaders such as Vernon and Clyde and others here. So it's passing on the story and the importance of the American Indian movement, and that's why I wanted to do it for our people, but also for the broader community.
And
needs
for the
to
future.
Be educated. And for the future. It's the first curated work of art of the American Indian movement. So with that, let's go in and see the show.
Well, let's do that, Shirley. Let's go see the show.
Okay.
And here we are in the gallery, and my very special guest, of course, is Dick Bancroft, who is a photographer, which you're all going to be able to see this tremendous photo exhibit. Welcome, Dick.
Thanks, Vernon. Vernon is a problem for me because he's the guy that got me involved back in 1970. And I started shooting pictures of the Indian struggle in the urban area of Minneapolis and St. Paul back in the 70s. And what you're going to see here today is some posters and mainly a bunch of photographs of the early days of the American Indian movement. This is probably a very significant photograph because it shows 5 pipe carriers entering the UN building. And all 5 of these people have gone to the spirit world. They are Heathrow, Philip Deere, David Menangi, Chief Shenandoah from upstate New York.
Tadadaho, head chief of the Iroquois.
Yeah, and this is Larry Redshirt.
A descendant of famous warrior Redshirt who served at the Battle of the Bighorn.
And normally the UN wouldn't allow people like this to walk in that regalia with pipes. But they insisted on doing it, and they did it. And it's been on the cover of a couple of books put out by Akwesasne. This young lady is, this picture has gotten a lot of attention because she's obviously weeping and she's listening to testimony by people in the Russell Tribunal about the sterilization of Indian women. And I was photographing the people talking, and I turned around and half the room was in tears. This is Clyde and Pat Ballinger at the UN in 1977. And this Clyde, you don't recognize him there because he's got a mustache, but these people were very prominent in testifying on the Indians of the Americas and the land. And then we move on. This is up in a hot issue right now, the Arctic Wildlife Refuge, where the caribou drop their calves. And we had a conference up there above the Arctic Circle in a town called Arctic Village. And these are the delegates from the International Indian Treaty Council that attended that conference. This is after the Geneva Conference in 1977, and Clyde told me then, he told these people to assemble for the traditional group picture, and he said if everybody who gets in the picture wants a copy, the bald-headed guy will make sure he'll get it.
Well, that's great.
This is a particularly distressing and sad part of the show because it represents 4 visits that I made as a journalist to visit with Leonard Peltier in 3 different penal institutions. Leonard's been in prison now he's in his 30th year for a crime he did not commit. And even the FBI, which falsely accused him of killing 2 FBI agents in 1975, it's been proven now that he did not fire the weapon that killed the 2 agents. But they keep him in jail because the FBI needs to have some Indian serve time for the loss of 2 men. Nobody prosecuted anybody for the loss of Joe Stuntz, who was killed in the shootout that occurred at Grandma Jumping Bulls in those days. I was not at the shootout, but I have visited Leonard 4 different times. And these pictures are in sequence of the visits, showing his aging process. It's really distressing to me to go into a prison to visit Leonard, but when I see him, when I sit with him and photograph him, I am lifted by his spirit, and I walk out of there, invigorated by this brave and noble person who knows who did the shooting and is not talking about it. But he serves the time for it. And the FBI says that he was complicit, therefore he must serve 2 life terms. One of the really fun things, Vernon, that I did during the early 70s and later on even, was to photograph the kids in the survival schools, which were popping up all over the place. And this was taken at the Red Schoolhouse in St. Paul, and this is the Heart of the Earth Survival School in Minneapolis. Actually, it wasn't in the current structure that it's in at the university. It was in an abandoned house in South Minneapolis. Now again, a poster that Steve Blake did, you've heard him mentioned before, but every time there was a conference or a meeting or something going on, the poster was the way to publicize it. And the poster art was really one of the best was Steve Blake, who's now quite ill, but still around. And I saved these as we went along.